You're joining the 162nd episode of The People's Court. It's Saturday, June 7th, 2014. Today we'll be talking about the finals and the mysteries of muscle cramps. Court is now in session. If you'd like to contact The People's Court, please call us at 424-ADJOURN. That's 424-235.
And now here are your hosts, Chris, Lamont, and Adam.
I messed up already. Let's reset that. If you'd like to contact the People's Court, please call us at 424-ADJOURN. That's 424-235-7633. Or you can hit us up on Twitter at People's Court FM. You can always check out our blog, http://thepeoplescourt.fm. And joining us are our very special co-host today, Jason McAdams. Jason, thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks for having me on.
You know, we really appreciate you being able to fill in last minute like this. And we've talked about having you on the show for quite a while now, because you of course helped us out back in December, but that was back in December. I mean, a lot's happened since then. So I know you're just itching to talk about anything and everything.
I can't believe that was back in December. That kind of blew me away just now.
Yeah, I didn't either. And then I realized, I kind of looked back and tried to figure out when was the last time we saw you, and that was back in December.
Yeah. Well, let's make it a 6-month preparation worth the wait.
And I'm a little sad that Adam couldn't join us today because, of course, he's the only one of us that actually likes one of the teams that's in the finals. But we have a finals rematch here between the Heat and the Spurs, and I think this is a matchup that none of us really expected going into the season. I don't know how you saw the season unfolding, Jason, but none of us here predicted Spurs Heat again.
No, I mean, I think that the Spurs. I always think about what Bill Simmons said about how he doesn't think the Spurs are going to win, but he's just decided he's not going to count them out until they actually do not make the playoffs. You continue to get surprised by him, and this year absolutely it was a surprise. But I mean, I think this team's better than last year's team. It's impressive.
I think Lamont actually had the Spurs making the finals again.
Getting ready to say just that I am on record back in November as being one of the very few that actually thought the Spurs would recover from a season ago and make the finals. So I got half of the teams right. I did think Miami would make the finals when the season started, but here they are.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, how improbable was it for not only the Spurs to make it back, but for the Heat to make a fourth consecutive finals appearance? They're the first team to do that since the Celtics back in the 80s. And there aren't many teams that even have had an opportunity to make four consecutive finals, and the teams that had before all failed. The Lakers had an opportunity in 2003. They got bounced, I believe, that year in the second round. They had an opportunity again in 2011, got bounced in the second round. The Pistons in the late 80s, early 90s made three consecutive finals, but that was pretty much the end of that run for that team. And of course, the Bulls had two teams also make three consecutive finals, but Michael Jordan retiring kind of put the kibosh on a fourth run. So now here the Heat are doing something that we haven't seen in 30 years, nearly 30 years, in a time where it's even more difficult now to do it because you have 3 7-game series. It's more taxing on the team, the players. They're playing more games now than they had to before. So the fact that they were able to get back is just a huge testament to their consistency, as well as the disappointment of the Pacers, right? Let's be honest here.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting that, I mean, we're in the era of the Heat now. I mean, you can't really dispute that, right?
No, and it's a great thing for the NBA and basketball fans in general. When you get the best player on the world making it to the ultimate stage for 4 consecutive years, That can only be great. That can only be good.
How do you think their run compares to like the teams that I just mentioned, the Bulls, these Spurs, even the Lakers, other teams that have made lengthy runs at titles, whether they've run one, two in a row, or made the finals more than 2 or 3 times in a row? I mean, how does their run compare to those other teams?
I think in a lot of ways it's greater than the other teams, simply because they've had. Usually, when a team gets a target on their back, it's because they're the defending champions, or they have the best. In Miami's case, they've had a target on their back simply because of the way they assembled their team and the fallout, the backlash from it. So since day one, they've had at least one big bullseye target on their back since they started, and then you add to it the fact that they've won back-to-back titles. They made the finals. So I think when you look at that, in that perspective, it's a lot better than, say, the bad boy Pistons going there, or even in the mid '80s when the Celtics made their four consecutive finals.
Here's a question: whose legacy is this series most important to? We have at least 4 Hall of Famers playing in this series. So, Jason, who do you think's legacy is going to be helped or hurt the most by a finals victory or defeat here, out of all these guys that are playing?
Well, I would have to say that I think Duncan's probably the obvious choice. I think that you can have a conversation about, and you hear a lot about, the best player between Jordan and LeBron for that era, and you hear Kobe and you hear Duncan. And I mean, you hear a lot of it's Kobe because of 5 championships versus 4 championships. Now, that's a simple argument. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that go into it. But I think that if they win this series and Duncan is, finals MVP, or at least contributes strongly like he did in Game 1 pretty consistently throughout the series, I think that he kind of pulls ahead of Kobe in that debate.
That's interesting that you bring that up, because we're all Laker fans here. Let's get that out on the table right now, just so people understand the perspective that we have. We're all Laker fans here. Is it important to you as a Laker fan that Kobe be regarded as the player of his generation?
It's important to Kobe. As far as important to me, I mean, I think for me, what I prefer more as a Laker fan, I'd like to see him kind of mentioned alongside, and he is already, I think, Magic and Kareem and Wilt, Jerry West, the greatest Lakers of all time. If he's in that pantheon, you can argue number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever. I don't put him ahead of Magic just because I grew up with Magic as my favorite player, but I think that he doesn't care about that. I don't really care about that. I care more about his place within Lakers lore, I guess.
Yeah, that's interesting, because my entire family are Laker fans, and the sentiment was that this particular finals was difficult to decide who to root for, because I think we kind of talked about this pre-show. A lot of people tend to be LeBron haters, so they want to see LeBron lose. They're tired of the Heat winning, so they want to see the Heat lose. But on the flip side, the only way that you accomplish the Heat losing is for the Spurs to win. But if the Spurs win, then Duncan gets his 5th ring, and then this, right? Because Kobe no longer can say, I have more rings than anybody else in my generation. All of a sudden, there's another guy out there who has the same number of rings that he does. For me personally, it doesn't matter. The fact that Tim Duncan has an opportunity to get his 5th championship title doesn't impact what Kobe's done on the floor, and it doesn't diminish the fact that Kobe is still not just only one of the greatest Lakers ever, but also one of the greatest players ever. So I'm not so hung up on Kobe's standing, I guess, in history as compared to Duncan's. I think both of them are top 10 players that this league has ever seen, and nothing at this point. There's nothing that either one of them can do that will diminish the other person's place in history.
Right.
Now, of course, Duncan winning another championship will raise his place in history. If Kobe somehow gets another chance at a title, it would raise his place in history. But there's nothing that's going to take either one of them down a peg at this point. They've already established that they're fantastic players. So they'll both have their numbers hanging in the rafters in San Antonio and in LA. They'll both be Hall of Famers. If there's ever another 50 greatest team, they'll both be on that team. So I mean, for me to root against Duncan and the Spurs for that reason is petty.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree.
So let's talk about the series now. We've kind of talked about legacy and histories of these teams. Let's talk about this series. Lamont, what do you think some of the keys to the series are going to be for the Heat and Spurs?
Lineups. Basically, if whichever team can force their opponents out of their comfort zone for the longest, and I think those are the two. I think those are my two keys to the series.
So you think San Antonio is going to win then?
Yeah.
Because they have way much more flexibility in the lineups, in the construction of their lineups than the Heat do. Both teams are extremely flexible, but the Spurs are so deep that they can pretty much come up with any configuration that will change that the Heat won't be able to match.
The one thing that we didn't see a whole lot from Miami is what they call their ultra small lineup, which would be Chris Bosh, LeBron James, and three guards, whether it's Dwayne Wade, Ray Allen, and I don't think we saw that.
Cole or Chalmers, one of those guys.
I don't remember seeing that in Game 1 for long stretches, which would be tough for. Which would be a tough guard. It's nearly unguardable for any team, and that would lead to the chess match. How will the Spurs respond to that? Do they keep combination of Duncan, Diaw, and Splitter, or do they only play one of those guys? And which one of those guys do they play? That would be a tough matchup, and I don't remember seeing that for long stretches in Game 1.
I agree.
Well, it's tough for them.
Excuse me, Lamont. I think that I think that what is interesting about that, as far as the lineups, we saw in Game 1 that Duncan was able to take advantage of being guarded by not Splitter, or rather not somebody like a traditional center, or even Birdman very much. He was able to dominate offensively in a way that he really hasn't been able to do consistently in a couple of years. You can certainly get games here and there. If Duncan can average over 20 points in the series to take advantage of that, they're going to be very tough to beat.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if we talked about this last week, whether or not Spoelstra is going to roll out Greg Oden at some point in this series as kind of his secret weapon. But Duncan had a terrific Game 1. I don't think he missed but more than one shot in that game.
Yeah, he went 9% from the field.
So if lineups are going to be the key to the series, as you mentioned, San Antonio just has so much more flexibility. They go 10, 11 guys deep, and they've been doing so all playoffs. I mean, when they can just roll out a guy like Matt Bonner at any point in the series, a guy who hasn't played except garbage time throughout the entire playoffs, that helps. So if that's going to be the key to the series, I definitely like the Spurs. I guess before we continue, let's move on to the X factors. Jason, who do you think would be like an X factor for this series?
Well, for the Spurs, I would have to say it'd be Kawhi Leonard. I think that you know to some extent what you're going to get from the quote-unquote big three, although you can make an argument that Leonard is every bit the player Ginobili is when you think about his two-way talent. But if he's able to give them something offensively, because because I mean as far as on their team, he's a solid offensive player, but he's probably one of the worst perimeter shooters, with the exception of Duncan and Splitter, that even gets run for them, obviously because they want to shoot so many threes. And if he can offensively hold his own while still being able to expend energy on LeBron, or for those times when Diaw or somebody else is covering LeBron, he's the biggest one for the Spurs to me. For the Heat, it's sort of somebody from the I sort of think of it as the same player, but somebody from Rashard Lewis and or Ray Allen. They've got to get one of those role players hot from deep, because Wade doesn't hit threes. LeBron does, but he's not getting them off of ball movement as much. He's more of a off the dribble guy, and they have to be able to match the Spurs 3-point shooting, because if they're scoring 3 at a time and you're scoring 2 at a time, it's really hard to keep up.
Yeah, in that regard, I actually think the key to this series is going to be Danny Green. Because when you kind of saw it in Game 1, that game was back and forth for 3 quarters, and nobody really took control of the game until the 4th quarter, of course, when LeBron had his issues and wasn't able to stay on the floor. But then at the same time, Danny Green got hot. And when Danny Green gets hot, something happens to the Spurs. Like, that's when they down. Like, when you see the Spurs whoop up on teams by 20 and 30 points, it's when Danny Green gets hot. So, and you saw it in last year's finals. The first 5 games of those finals, when Danny Green was looking like a finals MVP, that was Danny Green, 3-point shooting, setting records. I don't remember exactly what took him off of that in the final 2 games of the series. But that's when the Heat were able to get back into it and obviously win the championship. So I think how Danny Green plays, and he's been a completely different player on the road than at home in this postseason, the way Danny Green plays is going to have a huge impact on the outcome of this series. What do you think, Lamont?
Going back to a year ago, they basically the Miami stopped rotating off of him, and then they that's pretty much what they did. So like he wasn't getting the same open looks that he got through the first 5 games, and he was absolutely cold on Thursday night up until that 4th quarter run. Both him and Kawhi Leonard were pretty much invisible through most of the game. Of course, Kawhi has to guard LeBron, and he was in foul trouble. But up until that fourth quarter run, they hadn't done anything to affect the game positively, really. I think my X factor for the series is from the Spurs side is Boris Diaw and not Kawhi Leonard or Danny Green. I just think that if Boris can play, he's so versatile with the way he can play, he can affect the game. He only had 2 points on Thursday, but he was still a plus 30, pitching 10 rebounds. His passing was great. 6 assists. He's able to be a release valve for the Spurs, for Miami's trapping defense when they decide to trap, and he's a triple threat with that release valve. So as opposed to say Danny Green, who really should only be spot up shooting when he puts the ball in the dribble, tries to get into the lane, and like he did in Game 1, he tried to Tony Parker floater and airballed it. Like Danny Green putting the ball on the floor for more than 3 or 4 dribbles isn't his strength, but Boris can do that. He's a good shooter. He's great with the passing, so I think at times he is a secondary defender on LeBron. So I think he's the Spurs X factor. I agree with Jason that someone like Reggie Lewis is Miami's.
Oh, not Reggie Lewis. I hope not.
Rashard Lewis.
They're going to be in trouble. Yeah.
Rashard Lewis. I think Rashard Lewis is Miami's X factor because he's going to be starting ahead of Udonis Haslem. He's playing more minutes lately than Shane Battier. Birdman's been hurt. And basically, he's going to be the guy that the Spurs leave open. They consider right now Chris Bosh is a bigger 3-point threat than Rashard Lewis, and he's going to have to continue, making shots. Like he scored 10 points. He was 2 of 6 from the 3-point line on Thursday. He's going to have to continue that, which is okay, not great, but okay. He's going to have to keep on shooting like that. And he's going to have to guard either Duncan, Splitter, or Diaw. So I think he's going to be a key.
So quickly, before we kind of move on to the big elephant in the room after Game 1, who's going to win? I mean, sure, we've got one game in the book, so it's a little bit easier to predict, but who's going to win this series, guys? Lamont, I'll start with you. Elders first.
I said it in November, and I'm not changing it now. I'm San Antonio.
Any venture on how many games this series will go?
What I'm rooting for is somewhere close to last season's epic finals, which means we got 7 games.
Right.
So that's what I want, so that's what I'm going to stick with. San Antonio in 7.
Jason, who do you think is going to win?
I jump on that same bandwagon. I think Spurs in 7. I think one of the biggest things you saw last night, or Thursday night rather, was that Ginobili is going to be able to be much more effective this year than he was in last year's finals.
Hey, we just found another X factor.
Yeah, absolutely. And if he can take the pressure off of Parker, especially with the injury, if Ginobili shows he can run the offense for a solid amount of time in the game, that's going to be huge for them. And I think that the Spurs are a better team than they were last year. I think you make a case that the Heat are not as good as they were last year, although obviously they still have a shot. Anytime you've got LeBron James, you've got a shot. But I do think Spurs take it in 7. And I think that when we talk about X factors and then just mentioning Ginobili as well, that speaks to how amazing the Spurs and Popovich in particular are at game planning and taking what the other team gives you. If you're going to give us Danny Green hitting threes, we're going to take that. And then I think they kind of stay away from the fool's gold of posting up Splitter overly much because it's just not a strength of his game. And you see a lot of coaches, he undersized guy on him, put him in the post. Well, if he's not a good post player, you've tricked the other team of running the offense through the 5th best player. So, but I think that Popovich is able to stay away from that. There will be a bunch of different heroes, but at the end of the day, I think the Spurs pull it out.
I really want to disagree with you guys.
Feel free to.
Because last week when Adam pushed us for who we thought would win the championship, and I said the Heat, only because they have LeBron James, and other than that, there aren't very many other differences between these two teams. I do agree that it's going to go 7 games. I think it's going to be another epic finals between these two. But after what I saw in Game 1, I'm inclined to go with the Spurs. And a lot of it has to do with the things that we've talked about this far. The fact that the Spurs have more depth, they have more flexibility in the lineups that they can roll out. They get production from every single position on the floor. They get 3-point shooting from every single position on the floor, except, of course, Splitter and Duncan. So I don't know how Miami's going to overcome all of those disadvantages, despite the fact that they have the best player in the world. I just don't see it. So I'm going to go Spurs in 7 as well. There it is. I flip-flopped once again. Lamont, you've been consistent all season. You stuck with the Spurs, but I flip-flopped yet again.
I'm just stubborn.
So, like I said, we have to talk about this because it was the defining storyline throughout Game 1. In San Antonio, they had an air condition malfunction, which caused the heat within AT&T Center to soar to as high as 90 degrees at times, which is hotter than it was outside the stadium, hotter than it was even in Miami. It was just hot in there. One of the ramifications of the heat was, of course, the players having to adjust, and one of the players that couldn't was LeBron James, who missed a good portion of the fourth quarter with muscle cramps. And, well, let's say LeBron was criticized heavily for his inability to play through the muscle cramps. Jason, do you play any sort of sports?
I mean, I've played a decent amount of basketball in my past, not so much recently. I've got some back issues, but yeah.
Have you experienced muscle cramps before?
Yeah, I have, but apparently nobody in the media has because they just feel like it's something that you just ignore. I mean, if LeBron had rolled his ankle, nobody would be saying a word. Well, there's always going to be people harping on LeBron, but certainly the noise wouldn't be as loud as it is right now. And I mean, I don't see the difference. You know, it's your leg is unable to function, and what's the whole idea that he should tough that out? It's not the way it works.
If somebody had the nerve to say if Willis Reed was able to play through a broken leg, then why can't LeBron play through cramps? That's just, I'll even disagree with you a little bit there, Jason, in that if you roll your ankle, there are things you can do to make the ankle more manageable. You can re-wrap, you can tape, you can adjust the way that you run. Like, there are things you can do to make it easier. It's still difficult, of course, to play through ankle injuries, but there are things that you can do to play through them. When you get a cramp, you can't do anything. You basically have to wait for it to pass and hope it doesn't come back. Those are only two actions of recourse. When your leg locks up, you can't move. You just can't move. Lamont, you ever had cramps like that where you just can't move?
Yes, I think.
You think? Well, I'll speak from experience because I've definitely experienced these muscle cramps through playing basketball, from swimming, from walking down the street. I mean, I'm not an elite athlete, so of course I'm maybe prone to cramping more than these guys are. But the fact is, when you get a muscle cramp, it takes you out. It's debilitating. There's nothing you can do to treat it. You can't just wrap your leg up tighter and hope that they don't come back. Like, once they start happening, and I'll speak to this specific kind of thing. We used to play in a league that sometimes required us to play back-to-back games. And we're talking rec league here, so I mean, it's not the highest level of competition, but at the same time, when you're over 30 and you have to play in a back-to-back game, it's going to take its toll on you, especially when you're not in the greatest of shape. So I remember one of these times we had to play in a back-to-back game. In the second game, I think about halfway through the first half, because we played two halves, both of my legs just started locking up. And we're playing, of course, this is Southern California, and it's summertime, so it was hot. And then I don't remember how air-conditioned, but I think when we used to play in that North Anaheim,
sometimes it was
hot in there. But it was one of the hotter gyms that we played in.
Yeah.
So I started cramping up. You can feel it start happening, right? So then the first cramp comes, and what you do is you stretch it out, try and get some water in you, and hope that, like I said, that they don't come back. Then you start playing again, and then what happens? You start cramping up some more. And then eventually, it's not just the one leg, it's both legs. And pretty soon, it's not just a matter of, can I stretch this thing out? It's, okay, this thing is locked up. Both of my legs can't move. You saw LeBron get carried off the court. It's probably because he had cramps in both of his legs, not just one of them. So both legs lock up, whether it's a calf or a hamstring. Either one of those things will just absolutely debilitate you. I think I had calf in one leg and hamstring in the other. And this is halfway through the first half of the second game, so we're about 10 minutes into the game of a 40-minute game. And I just had to take myself out. And I figured, well, let me just sit. But no, once they start occurring, they're going to continue occurring until you completely rest your body. There was a moment in that fourth quarter that Spoelstra and LeBron have talked about where LeBron was about to go back in the game, and Spoelstra just said, no, are you crazy? Sit back down, LeBron. And that's just Spoelstra understanding the nature of the situation that with LeBron, even though he may not have been experiencing a cramp at that particular moment, that the minute he went back on the court, started exerting himself again, he was going to go through more cramps. Because the only way to get beyond the cramps is to rest. That's it. That's all you can do. So, yeah, all these people out there who were criticizing LeBron, calling him weak, calling him soft,
are forgetting that he actually tried to play through the cramps.
Yeah, you can't.
He actually scored his 25th, his last basket when the game was still up in the air before the Spurs went on a run. He took a jump shot. He was probably already starting to feel the early effects of the cramp, where he wasn't driving the ball, and took a couple of jump shots. After one of those, he asked to be taken out. Spurs scored. He called timeout and was subbed out of the game. And then a couple minutes later, he tried to give it a go, scored a layup, and then that's when he fully cramped out, and that's when he had to be carried. So like people saw him being carried off the court to the sideline, not being able to move, whatever, blah blah blah, and then all this fallouts and soft and whatever. Forgot that he actually did give a go to play through it, scored a basket, and then he was done after that.
Yeah, and I'll even say this: another situation where I had to deal with cramps, but was kind of able to play through it. And this is the only way that it can happen, and a person who's playing in a professional sport would never do what I did. But in this instance, I was also playing a back-to-back, but it was by choice. The league that we play in now has different divisions that play at the same time, and if you're in one division, you can actually also play in the other division. So we played a game, and then a team that was playing after us, but in another division, asked, "Hey, is there anybody that wants to play? We only have 4 guys." So I said, "Sure, I'll play again," because I was disappointed with the way that I played in the first game, and I just wanted to keep playing. So I went to go play with them, and then I started feeling the cramps coming on again, right? So basically what I had to do, because that team only had 5 players, and if I wasn't able to go, then they would have to play with 4. The only way that I was able to make it through that game was by not running. I basically stopped playing offense. I only played defense. The only time I came down the floor on offense was when I really had to. Other than that, I was walking up and down the court, barely running at all, and I was still feeling the cramps coming on. And I knew the minute that I tried to run full speed, I was going to lock up completely. There's no way LeBron would have been able to finish that game playing that way to prevent himself from locking up completely. There's no way. You can't expect any professional athlete to run half speed or even less than that, especially when they're playing in a finals game. That's not going to happen. That guy's going to go full bore as much as he can, and he did it as long as he could. He cramped up, and those are the breaks.
I think that the only thing sillier than the people criticizing LeBron's toughness are the people that are questioning his conditioning. I mean, this is, in my opinion, quite literally the most athletically, physically dominant player the game has ever seen. And the idea that he's in some way not in good enough shape, it blows me away.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that LeBron's been dealing with his entire career, apparently. And
yeah, Brian, I think it's Brian Windhurst.
Yeah.
ESPN Chronicle, like he's had a history of cramps.
He's had a history of cramps. And there are some studies that say that cramps could potentially be genetic. Like you might just have a genetic disposition towards experiencing cramps, and LeBron might be one of those people. So it's not that he's not in shape. I mean, the guy averages, 38 minutes a game? It's not like he's unable to play long minutes, to play, it's just, I said, those were the breaks. The conditions that he had to play in, this is a guy who has a lengthy history of cramps already. I mean, it was just unfortunate and unlucky. That's all I can say about it.
Yeah, unless you believe someone in San Antonio went Red Auerbach.
I can't. I can't say that they didn't, but I can't say that they did, knowing that if we do this, LeBron is going to cramp in this game, and then we're going to have the advantage to take over in the fourth quarter.
Yeah. I don't think they did it on purpose, although I did find it funny that I guess it started to work after midnight local San Antonio time.
Oh, really?
I think so. I think I saw that it was fixed midnight, early Friday morning or something like that. I don't know. But it's back up. It'll be back up and running for game 2.
There you go. So if LeBron cramps up again, then we know it wasn't a conspiracy. So I want to talk about these comments that Horace Grant made recently, because I'm curious what you guys think about the old former Chicago Bull and what he had to say about LeBron James and the Miami Heat. So just real quick, here are his comments. He said, "The Heat wouldn't have had a chance. We would have locked them up." Oh, and then he says it again, because as if one time wasn't good enough. He says it again. "We would have locked them up, especially with the rules today. Michael would have had a field day." Am I the only person who is yawning at yet another player from the 90s saying how much they would have locked up LeBron James, or how much they would have dominated the team from this current era of basketball?
I sure
I'll answer at once.
No. Go ahead, Jason.
No, I don't think you're the only one who finds it a little bit ridiculous. The interesting thing to me, the word he used of "we would lock them up," to me suggests that he's saying that, like, defensively they would have shut down the Heat. And maybe he doesn't mean that. Maybe he means it in a more general way. But I think back to the '91 Finals, when after the Lakers won Game 1 and they put Pippen on Magic, and then he pretty much dictated them winning that series, because since the Lakers had lost Kareem, it was largely about how Magic could do. And you look at somebody like LeBron, who is as big and faster and much stronger, much more athletic than Magic Johnson. There was nobody like that in the league then. I mean, to that point, Michael Jordan was one of the top athletes in the league as far as leaping ability, strength, speed, the whole package. I feel like athletically, almost every team has someone on par with Jordan at this point. Now, there obviously were things that made Jordan great other than his athleticism. And I think that those skills, sort of his much vaunted the will to win, and the rhetoric that never stops with Jordan, and Adam and I, and probably you guys have had the conversation about how that sort of gets revised throughout history. But I think that the Jordan Bulls, what was special about them was their ability to be dominant in the regular season because of Jordan's, his desire and his need to beat a team in a meaningless game on the second night of a back-to-back. But if you're talking about playoff series, and you're talking about Michael Jordan trying to score against LeBron James all throughout that series, I think that he would have come as close to shutting down Jordan as anyone ever did. We mentioned the name Gary Payton when we were talking before the show. Gary Payton was somebody who did a great job on Jordan in the finals. Once George Karl actually put him on him. If you remember the finals, for some reason he delayed that in '97 or '96 rather. But the idea that they would destroy them in terms of like a one-on-one matchup, back-to-back games in a 7-game series, it's silly. Nobody's going to destroy the Heat. They've got somebody who might end up being the best player of all time. You're not going to sweep them at this point. He's in the prime of his career. Wade is also one of the top, somewhere between 20 and 50 probably players of all time. they run so much more sophisticated offense and defense than the Bulls ran. I mean, even the triangle in the 90s wasn't on the level of the multiple pick and rolls we see now from teams like Miami. They might win. I certainly don't think the Heat would necessarily blow them out, but Horace Grant, I would love to see Horace Grant playing in the league today against some of the athletes they have in the league. I mean, Horace Grant is probably 120% of Udonis Haslem, and Haslem didn't even get to the game last night.
Now, you bring up an interesting point about the defensive matchup. One of the players that Michael Jordan always said gave him the biggest problems was Joe Dumars. Joe Dumars is 6'2", 6'3". You know, he's not the athlete that Michael Jordan is, clearly. Yet this was a guy as a defender that gave Jordan the biggest problems. And like you mentioned, Gary Payton also did a really good job of him in those finals. But Gary Payton, again, only 6'4", 6'5", and not nearly as fast or athletic as Michael Jordan. You take a person like LeBron James, who's bigger than Jordan was, heavier than Jordan was. I don't know if he's faster than Jordan was, but he's pretty darn close, if not faster than, at least as fast as Jordan, just as athletic, but probably stronger. You take a guy like that who can keep up with Michael on the perimeter and put him on him. I don't think Jordan ever faced a guy like that, a physical specimen like LeBron James. To say that Jordan would have had a field day with the rules today, that's one of the things that players, I think, of old days don't completely understand. Sure, the rules have changed to allow easier driving lanes, right? Because there's no more hand checking. But one of the things that one of the ways that the rules have changed now that actually helps defenses is the fact that there's no more illegal defense. When you can zone up one side of the court, it changes everything. Isolation basketball is much different now than it used to be. The only way you can really isolate is from the top of the floor. And even then, guys are, hedging to one side and stuff. It's just another players misunderstand the way the rules have affected the game today, where they think, oh, well, the rules have changed in a way that's worse for the league than it was when we played. I think it would be just as difficult for Michael Jordan to play with today's rules than it was for him to play with the so-called Jordan rules back then.
You guys have responded to his comments more eloquently than I will. When I was your age, I had to walk to school through 40 miles of snow, and that's what all these guys sound like when they make these comments. Yeah, it would be interesting to see, but basically, like especially when someone like Horace Grant, like trying to rein in on somebody else's time. Horace had his time. He was a member of some really good teams 20 years ago. Well, that was 20 years ago. These are the really good teams now. These are the really good players now. Shut up.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I said about Kobe and Duncan, right? There's nothing that the Heat do today that diminishes what Horace accomplished with his Bulls teams back in the early 90s. Right? Like, your accomplishments are set in stone, Horace. They're there. Everybody knows that you're a part of one of the greatest teams in NBA history. And the fact that the Heat have an opportunity to win 3 championships in a row doesn't take away from what you did back then, Horace. So don't be mad, man. Like you got to rain on the Heat's parade now?
Yeah.
You said you weren't going to say anything less more eloquent than, but that was a great point, man. While we're speaking about players from the olden days. I want to talk about Kevin Durant and how he might compare, not directly, but sort of indirectly with these older guys. Because Kevin Durant, of course, this year's MVP, was unable to make another finals appearance this year. And thinking about Durant and his career arc, he's been in the league for 7 years now, or 8 years? 7 years. He's been to one finals. He has one MVP award under his belt, a number of All-Star appearances, number of first-team All-NBA appearances, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing he hasn't been able to yet is win a title. And it made me think about guys who are similar to him, who have won MVP awards, who have made it to the finals, yet weren't able to win, who've come close to making it back to the finals, couldn't quite get there. Guys like Karl Malone, guys like Charles Barkley, actually more specifically Charles Barkley. And these neither one of them were able to win titles during their careers, but they're still very successful players, both Hall of Fame players. And it made me wonder, given the era that Kevin Durant is playing in, which it might be kind of similar to the era that Malone and Barkley played in, is Kevin Durant destined for that Malone-Barkley career arc, where maybe they make a couple finals, maybe they get a couple MVPs, but they never win a championship because of the fact that they play in a difficult conference, and the fact that there's somebody in the other conference who's just so good that they dwarf everybody else. What do you think? I mean, can Kevin Durant overcome that?
I don't see why not. This is sort of the middle of LeBron James' prime, whereas Kevin Durant is just now entering his prime, and he has a teammate who's the same sort of in the same level. I don't see why. I don't think it's his destiny to be headed towards great player without a title status. I don't think that's necessarily set in stone. You know, he's still got a lot of years left for him to get back. Yes, he currently plays in a really tough conference. Yes, there's always been somebody better, but as a franchise, they still currently have 2 of the top 12 players available. Some interesting pieces, a good solid role player.
What young interesting pieces do they have, other than Durant and Westbrook?
Young interesting.
And Ibaka, obviously.
Reggie Jackson.
He's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So I don't think it's set in stone that Durant will never win a title. It may not happen with the Thunder. We'll have to wait and see how that goes. But I think he can still. I don't think he's destined for that status.
What do you think, Jason? I mean, can Durant win the championship?
I think he certainly can, but some things need to change. His game, while he's an incredible scorer and a really underrated defender, solid rebounder, he really has some room to grow. You saw it a little bit this year with movement without the ball. He really improved on that, and that was something he needed to work on. I think his game off the dribble and eventually his post game needs to evolve a little bit. But more importantly, I think there's been this sort of complacency with the Thunder, with the idea of even going back to when they had Harden. It was, we've got 3 of the best 10, at least, young players in the game. They're young, and as they're growing, we're just going to be guaranteed this opportunity to be a fantastic team year after year. And because of that, I think you've seen them not really add anything of value to their roster. Since they drafted James Harden or Serge Ibaka, you haven't seen a single signing, I feel like, in the offseason that has improved their team in an appreciable way. And I mean, you can't do it with two superstars and role players who are not top level guys. I mean, I don't even know if you can do it anymore with two superstars and great role players, but you certainly can't do it with two superstars and Jeremy Lamb and Kendrick Perkins. I will say that Steven Adams is a promising big man. I think he's going to have a nice future in the league, and that same complacency has got them still with Scotty Brooks, who, in my estimation, in what I've seen, I'm no expert, but I've been watching the NBA a long time, and I haven't seen Scotty Brooks do anything that would give me the idea that he is the coach to stick with. Not to say that he's done anything horrible, but he's been roundly outcoached by Popovich every time I feel like they've lost to the Spurs, and the time they beat the Spurs, it wasn't because of some amazing game planning. It was because Durant and Westbrook are transcendent talents, and Westbrook especially, his athleticism is just absurd, and they just went to town on the Spurs, and they played this amazing series that isn't the norm for them, and because of this idea of they'll get better, they'll grow together. It's this complacency is set in with them that something needs to change. I mean, Sam Presti, the GM, gets a lot of credit for being an excellent GM, but what was the last move he made that really made that team better? And I mean, he traded Harden when a lot of people, both at the time, but certainly there's a lot of people for whom hindsight's 20/20. I don't think anybody knew Harden was going to be, one of the top 5 offensive players in the league, even if he is terrible on defense. But they haven't done anything to improve that team in several years, at least not anything that's going to move the needle in an appreciable way. And they can't keep relying on the fact that they've got one of the top players in the league and he's going to carry them there and their guys are going to get better. Like you said, Durant's in his 7th year. Westbrook and Ibaka are also not rookies anymore. This is, although they all have room for their games to grow, they're not going to get 50% better than they are now. You're going to see them grow by bits and pieces. And they really need to get lucky with some, maybe some lower draft picks and some, mid-level signings and that kind of thing that's going to be effective. But I do think that one thing they have going for them, and a lot of teams have going for them at the top of the NBA now, is with this draft being so deep, a lot of people have discussed, how the top 10 players, there's a lot of potential superstars there. I think because of the depth of the draft, you can get a pretty solid rotation player in the late 20s, and they're going to need to do that. I mean, they're going to need to knock some draft picks out of the park if they're going to improve that team.
Yeah, Sam Presti gained his reputation really by nailing 3 consecutive drafts in which he netted Durant, Westbrook, Harden, and Ibaka. And like you said, in order for them to continue to grow and to give themselves the best chance at a championship, you'll either have to nail another draft pick, and like this is a year that seems to be ready for that, or it's going to have to do something in free agency. Bringing in guys like Derek Fisher aren't going to push the needle that much. But Derek Fisher's a great leader. What he has left in the tank is, he's probably playing his last season. So I absolutely agree with that. That's a fantastic thought about the way the Thunder can give Durant the best opportunity to avoid becoming the next Malone or Barkley. But I think it's that time of the week, guys, and the time of the episode where we discuss our performances and embarrassments of the week. Now, there's not a lot to choose from this week because we only had one game.
Yeah.
But I think we'll do okay in finding performances and embarrassments of the week. Jason. It's because you got McAdams in the last name. That's why I said that. But Jason, who's your performance of the week?
This is an obvious one, but to me it's Duncan. To have the game he had, miss one field goal, 20 and 10, one of the most experienced guys on the court, one of the oldest guys on the court, and a guy who really hasn't been the focal point of the offense for them in a good 3 years, for him to be able to step up against Chris Bosh, who is an absolutely underrated defender, a lot of the time going against Chris Bosh, but spending some time going against Anderson, Birdman. But for him to pull that performance out, I mentioned earlier, but if he can do anything close to that consistently throughout the series and punish the Heat for those small lineups, he's going to win a Finals MVP. And I mean, that's going to help his legacy, as we said, and his legacy is already as one of the top 10 players in the history of the game.
The big gray-haired fundamental. Lamont, who's your performance of the week?
I'm going to go outside of game one. A couple of weeks ago, an author who, I hope I'm saying his name right, Ta-Nehisi Coates. He's a writer for The Atlantic. And a couple of weeks ago, he wrote an article entitled "The Case for Reparations." It's a very long article, too long to sum up here. The only thing we'll have time for is the article description, which reads: 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, 35 years of racist housing policy. Until we reckon with our compounding moral debts, America will never be whole. It's the best thing I've read, and I don't know how long. It'll be the best thing you read in, I don't know how often you read, but this article and the subsequent discussion, if people want to use this whole, I hate bringing it up again, but people want to say that, let's use the Sterling situation as a platform to talk about race. Well, these are the discussions that we need to be having as a country. So, shout out to Mr. Coates.
I will be sure to put a link to that article in our related links in the in the post for this episode. But definitely, I'll check that out. I haven't had an opportunity to read it yet, so I will. My performance of the week goes to Manu Ginobili. Like you said, he came out and had a real impact in Game 1, despite the fact he didn't play very many minutes. And the first half, just on fire, just came in and just knocked in 3 straight three-pointers. Like, I'm just going to drop these in. By the way, Miami, in case you forgot, I am Manu Ginobili. Finished with 16 points, 11 assists in Game 1. He's my performer of the week. Let's go to embarrassment of the week. Jason, who's your embarrassment, or what is your embarrassment of the week?
I have to say that Horace Grant's comments it just cracked me up. Who's even asking Horace Grant's opinion at this point? Who's going, let me see what Horace Grant has to say about this? Like you said, it just sounds like get off my lawn and don't, I walked uphill to school both ways, 40 miles in the snow at 100 degrees. It's just, there's no place for it. There's no need to, as you've said, Lamont, repeatedly, there's no need to diminish the performances of one great player or one great team in order to highlight those of another. And the sentiment was bad, the actual point was silly, and the sources, frankly, irrelevant.
Fantastic points on all of that. Lamont, who is your embarrassment of the week?
I'm going to go with ESPN commentator Mark Jackson, who gave us a preview of the whole fallout we talked about with LeBron's cramps. He said something after the first time, or maybe because LeBron asked him to be asked out of the game twice, no, 3 times. And either after the first or the second time, he said something like, "Oh, this is the finals. You got to just tell your body, not now." And that after that followed everything else that happened that we talked about. So Mark Jackson, shut up. You played before. You should know that there's some injury. Mark Jackson, you played before. You coached before. You've been involved with basketball for your entire life. You should know that there are some injuries you can't play through.
And on that note, I think my embarrassment of the week actually will be LeBron's cramps. And not because LeBron should be embarrassed by the fact that he had cramps. Just the timing of it was horrible. And as an athlete, I'm sure he feels like, damn, why did this have to happen to me now? And it kind of, like you said, you don't want to experience those things on the grandest stage in an NBA player's career. And it's just unfortunate that it had to happen. I don't think he's soft. I don't think he was weak in not being able to play through him, but I think he's probably just a little bit embarrassed by the fact that he was taken down by cramps. They need to come up with a new name for cramps. Calling them cramps really doesn't give justice to how painful they are. Just like, oh, cramps. You got a cramp? Come on, man. They ought to call it something like really scientific or something to make it sound worse than they are. Not worse, but to give a better idea of what you experience with muscle cramps like that.
They suggested something on yesterday's episode of True Hoop TV. One of the guys, I forget which one, they suggested the same thing. Like cramps doesn't encompass what it is, and yeah, I'll leave it at that.
All right, guys, I think that's going to wrap up this episode. Unless there's anything else that you want to say before we get on out of here.
I think we covered.
I'll take that as a no. But thank you for joining us. This has been another fantastic episode of the People's Court where we talked about everything from cramps to legacies to destiny and, for some reason, Horace Grant. If you want to contact the People's Court, you can always call us at 424-ADJOURN. That's 424-235-7633. Hit us up on Twitter. We'll be tweeting during the finals. The handle there is @PeoplesCourtFM. Or if you happen to miss an episode, which obviously if you're listening to this part, you didn't miss the episode, but if you want to catch up on previous episodes of the People's Court, check out our blog, http://thepeoplescourt.fm.
I promised to write about basketball again.
Lamont has promised to start writing about basketball just when basketball is about to be finished.
That's right.
Our next episode could be our last. I'm hoping it's not. But it could be our last if this does indeed end in 4 games. But we'll be back here next Saturday, June 14th at 11:30 a.m. And likely it'll be our second to last episode. How about that? And typically I'd use this space to announce a sponsor, but we don't have one.
Our sponsor is Jason, sideline reporter.
Jason, again, hey, thanks, man. Fantastic show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, fellas. We'll see you soon.
And court is adjourned.